Good evening, everybody, and thanks a lot for coming over. It's great to see so many people here. This is yeah, it's really nice to be in a room full of what I guess are synth freaks. A common trait amongst us all. Yeah, so I'm Chris CALC. I'm the product specialist for a company called Focusrite, and Focusrite, well, has basically become Focusrite Group in recent years. When I joined, it was 13 years ago, it was Focusrite Innovation, and doing a lot of work on the innovation side. That's kind of where I sort of started, really. But in recent times, Focusrite has kind of expanded, largely thank you to these things here, these SCARLET interfaces, and several other companies have joined now. So Adam Audio is part of the Focusrite group for the speakers, the monitors. And then in 2020, I nearly fell off my chair when Dave Smith's face popped up in a company meeting, and yeah, we'd started to work with Sequential, which was, yeah, needless to say for me, quite an exciting time. So I kind of, by proxy and by accident, became a product specialist for Sequential after all these years, which is great. And then a couple of years later, Focusrite came to an arrangement with Tom Oberheim. And we are now, Oberheim is one of the brands as well that we represent as well. And so when we originally talked about this, I came to Glasgow last year for a holiday, which surprised some people when I mentioned it before, but it's a great, great city. I love it up here, I genuinely do. When I spoke to Jason, the owner of Signal Sounds here, one of the guys here, said, oh, I don't really want to do product demos. So I kind of took that away, and what I've done is I've kind of put together a bit of, I suppose, just a little bit of history, just a little bit of a chat through kind of how these companies developed into being kind of the classics that they are now. And once we've gone through that bit, then we will land up on these two products here. And these two products, we have a Sequential desktop synthesizer and an Oberheim desktop synthesizer that were released, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. So brand new in the market. And sure, they are two synthesizers that you could say have been out for a while, but not in desktop form. We've got the Sequential Take 5 here, and we've got the Oberheim TEO-5. So after I've been through a little bit of a history lesson sort of thing, we'll just take a look at the synthesizers, have a good listen to them, and some of the things that we talk about through this point, hopefully will kind of become a little bit more real. So yeah. So we'll start off, and of course, you know, Sequential and Oberheim is basically, well, it's these two chaps here, Dave Smith and Tom Oberheim. Unfortunately, and very, very sadly, Dave passed away a few years ago. I think it's 2022, and it was, yeah, it was a real big shock to everybody. Of course, you know, it just recently kind of become part of Focusrite, so he was kind of looking. Kind of, you know, enjoying life a bit more, not having to run a big business, just focusing on the stuff that he wanted to work on, which is designing synthesizers. And so, yeah, so it's a real, obviously a really big shock for us at the time. But nevertheless, Sequential have carried on that good work and are carrying on, you know, with, you know, well, an enormous legacy there, but developing new things as well. Tom is still with us, of course. He turned 89 at the beginning of this month, born in 1936. Oh, that's insane. And he's as sharp as a pin as well. I had a chat with him actually a couple of weeks ago, which was a bit of a lifelong kind of bucket list thing to tick off there for me. And he's an absolutely diamond. He's a great guy. Yeah. So we're going to start off talking about Tom and Oberheim, and yeah, I mean, we just go through kind of where he started and kind of how we've got to, you know, for example, the TEO-5 that we've got here. Yeah, invented the world's first polyphonic synth. You know, he sort of smashed that myth that you could only play a single note on a synthesizer with the Oberheim 4-voice and the 8-voice. And yeah, when you think about Oberheim, you think about that sound. I'm going to go into a bit of depth on that later. Essentially, the SEM filter, the synthesizer expander module filter. And of course, you know, as with Sequential as well, but you know, these instruments have been used on well, in fact, we were chatting earlier about kind of like Live Aid and all that sort of stuff. But prior to that as well, these instruments have been used by world-class musicians since they were first being developed, to be honest with you. Obviously, here's Dave as well. Dave Smith started Sequential in 1974. His first synth came out in 1978. That's a bit of a famous synth as well. There's an example of one of the modern versions there, the Prophet 10. The Prophet 5 is a big deal. And again, such an innovator. The sort of things that this guy did was pretty spectacular, really. I mean, I've written it here, one of the founding fathers of MIDI. It's true to say that, you know, Dave Smith and Kakahachi-san from Roland got together at one NAMM show, I think it was, or something like that, one of those kind of big music expos, and said, we need, you know, we've got these instruments here, we need to be able to communicate together. And so they went away and defined MIDI, and that's, you know, that's kind of the standard that I expect everybody in this room is kind of familiar with to this very day. But what's quite interesting is whenever somebody would ask Dave about that, he'd turn around and say, I've done a load of other stuff as well. So, you know, he was quite keen that wasn't his defining thing, but it's a very important development in music technology, of course. So, yeah, but as I said, we're going to start off with Oberheim. And I thought, if I can, yeah, hopefully this will work. I'm going to just start off with this little thing.
Hey, Signal Sounds, Tom Oberheim here. I hear you're having a chat about some of the things I was involved with. I just wanted to stop by and say hello. It's been a heck of a ride for me since the early days when I first started, and who would have thought in 2025, here I am, quite a few years later, with new Oberheim stuff. I hope you have a great time this evening and learn about some new things and get to play my stuff. All the best and greetings from Northern California, Tom Oberheim.
So yeah, I asked him if he'd mind making a special little message for this one. And he was very up for it as well. As I say, I mean, I had about an hour and a half chat with him, and it was fascinating listening to some of his stories and the sort of things that he got up to. And in actual fact, I'll start off with a couple of these things here. This is right back to his very early days. As a young man, he was in Kansas City, I think. And eventually, I think some friends of his said, we're going to go to California. Do you want to come along? He's like, sure, I'll do that. So he jumped in the car with them and went over to California and kind of, you know, the typical kind of story, $10 in his pocket and a clapped out old car. And there he was, yeah, in, I think it was LA at that time. And he started working at a company, essentially as a draftsman to start off with, and started sort of designing circuits, analog circuits for analog computers. This is one of the first things that he worked on. This is a time code machine from 1959. I mean, that's just incredible to think that, you know, right at the dawn of this sort of technology, he was involved with this. I think this one's great. This one is I don't know quite what the machine is, but this was used in measuring quantities of fiberglass, I think, that were being used for rocket fuel tanks in 1964. Again, you know, one of the other things that he was working on. And these were really, it was the dawn of the computer age at this time, you know, of commercial computers. And I think the company he was working with, which is, I think was called NCR, they were one of the very first companies to build kind of mainframe computers in that time. And Tom was, you know, involved in building those things. He did, I think it was 11 years in that industry, from 1959 through till 1970. And by his own admission, he kind of, you know, he'd had enough of all that. He was not interested in digital by the end of all that, even back in those early days. And I think he felt a little bit burnt out by it all. So he kind of moved on. And I think while he was doing this work as well, he was also studying. He was doing a degree in physics. And he used to hang out with a lot of musicians because at UCL where he was, the music department and the physics department were quite close together. So he had a lot of friends who were musicians. And he was telling me the other day that there was a jazz band that I think it was a jazz band that he was friendly with. And one of the guys moved away. He left the jazz band. and I can't remember if he was a trumpet player, a saxophone, a trombone or something like that, but he was using a strange device called a ring modulator whilst playing the trumpet. And so his friends who were in this band approached him and said, could you build us a ring modulator? And he said, well, I've no idea, what does that do? I've not got a clue what that is. And so he squirreled away at the library of the university and found an old kind of paper from one of Bob Moog's associates, I think, back in the early 60s, before Bob was making, before Moog were making synthesizers. Somebody had written a white paper on a ring modulator and what that was. And so as a result, Oberheim started in 1970, and the very first product he did was this ring modulator. And he was making these himself and selling them, doing a nice little turnover with that sort of thing. But then he started working with a company called Maestro, who were basically a kind of a manufacturing kind of umbrella company, and they would get small manufacturers to make products for them. And so the ring modulator eventually became a Maestro product, as well as Oberheim. And that's kind of what started him on his way. And so, so that was his electronics. In 72, he was approached by somebody who said, can you build a Leslie speaker for the band, for what we're doing? I said, well, how do you make that? And how do you make that sound? I mean, that's a physically moving speaker. How do you do that? So he went off and essentially came up with the concept of a phase shifter, or phaser, as we now know them. I think this is really, again, one of the first available phaser pedals that were made. And he did quite a few of these sort of pedals as well throughout his time, including multi-effects, which was quite a thing back in the 70s, a multi-effects pedal. Anyway, I think he was at a NAMM show, and he saw the ARP 2600 here, and he was so taken with this thing that he really wanted to become an ARP dealer. And they were sort of saying, well, no, we're trying to get Guitar Center in the States to be the ARP dealer in LA. But that didn't happen. So eventually he phoned them back up and said, I'm still here if you want me to do it. And so he became the first ARP dealer. I think he said on the west side of the Mississippi, which is quite a thing, really. And he saw the synthesizer and just thought how powerful and what an enormous thing this was, and how great it sounded. But of course, at this time, there was no real way to there was ways to play it using keys, of course, but no real way to kind of control it in a sort of, in a kind of a sequencer style way. Moog had made their sequencer for the System 55, and I think it was in that. But there were analog sequencers like that. But Tom's sort of expertise was starting in that early digital stuff. So he designed this sequencer, the DS2A, and that was primarily as a product to work with the ARP 2600 and to be able to control and use that. So again, really interesting stuff. And all of this is before he started making any synthesizers. But we'll fast forward now to 1974, and this is kind of a watershed moment, I guess, for Oberheim. And it was the SEM, the Synthesizer Expander Module. This was designed not necessarily to be a synthesizer in its own right, although it quite clearly is a synthesizer in its own right, but really to be an accompanying synthesizer with other synths that were around. So, namely like the ARP 2600, which was popular at that time. And and this was, this is when we said that Oberheim sound, it's largely down to this thing, I would say. And the reason for that is the filter that's in there is a very, very kind of famous filter system, topology that's in there. But it was, again, it's quite a powerful synth. There's two oscillator synthesizer with variable wave shapes. So you were able to, use different waveforms from there. And then the filter that's in it, I think this was quite interesting because, of course, Moog had got the ladder filter for the Model D and for all of their products. ARP also had, well, initially a ladder filter, but later on just the low pass filter that they kind of worked with as well. But Tom had seen on another old ARP synthesizer, in fact, I'm going to slide over to this one because I love this thing. The ARP 2500, the precursor to the 2600, there was a state variable filter in this one. Now, a state variable filter is basically a filter that can be a low pass, a band pass filter, or a high pass filter. And he'd spotted one in the 2500. So he approached a chap called Dennis Collins, who basically did a lot of the design work for the 2600, and asked him to make a filter for him. And that was, so basically we kind of started with the bare bones from the 2500 state variable filter, and then, yeah, gave that to Tom. And Tom put all of this stuff together. So he had oscillators, they were Dave Rossum designed oscillators, I believe, in the SEM. Jim Cooper was a guy who did the VCAs and the envelope generators. The filters, Dennis Collin. And Tom had done the power supply and the top panel, the user interface board on there. And Tom put all of this stuff together and listened to it, and he sort of thought it sounded good, but just not good enough, really. So he spent about a week or so trying out different resistors, different capacitors, basically in the signal path between the oscillators through to the filter, through to the amplifiers, and basically used his ears until he got to the sound that he wanted. And that was essentially the SEM sound. Now, actually, I can quite easily give you a little example of the SEM sound because, let's see, if I go to this. Right, so there we go. That's the filter. It's a basic low-pass filter at this point. Doing what a low-pass filter would do. It's a two-pole, 12 dB per octave, so it's quite a gentle slope on there. But the thing about the SEM is the resonance is, I think, where all the flavour is. So if I just dial up the resonance to the middle point, my mouth is trying hard not to do filter face right now. Yeah, and that's resonance only halfway there. If I put resonance on full, now with an analogue filter, typically you would expect a bit of self-resonance there, a bit of self-oscillation, I should say. This one doesn't. So, you know, if I turn the oscillators down, in fact, yeah, let's see, if I just turn them down, he says, what's going on here? I've forgotten, yeah, forgot what I'm doing here. Turn the oscillators down, Chris, please. Okay, there we go, oscillator, whoop. Okay, it's not doing it there, never mind, I'll come back to that in a second. But let's say if the oscillators were turned down, in fact, I'll demonstrate it on this one, on the Tape 5, because this is a self-oscillating filter. So I'll turn the oscillators down here. Ooh. There we go. Now, resonance is up, and just hold on to your ears for a second, but pure sine wave there, just generated by the filter. No oscillators are harmed in the making of this sound. So that is a self-oscillating filter. With this one, it won't do that. Oh, if I switch over to it. But anyway, let's imagine that that we're listening to this, and now we've got the full resonance on. Let's listen to this filter. Now, if you ever watch any of Nick Batt's video from Sonic State, he always talks about sing-song filters, and that's... You can hear that kind of real flavour to it in there. Now, I mentioned as well, it's state variable, so if I stick it in the middle, and then move through the various states, now we're in a notch filter. And of course, if we move to a high-pass filter, cheers, Tom. So you can hear that there's a lot going on just there with the filter sound. I mean, that's just a basic oscillator sound going into the filter. Yeah, so that's really when people talk about the SEM synth, the synthesizer expander module, you know, and the Oberheim sound, really that's what a lot of people are kind of referring to there. And so, yeah, anyway, so Tom carried on the journey there. I've spent the whole of that talk with an ARP product up there, haven't I, instead of an Oberheim one. But anyway, let's carry on. So yeah, throughout the 70s there, through the mid-70s, Tom decided, well, these little expander modules, they're great, but I think he'd seen somewhere how in fact, Dave Rossen made a keyboard that was able to send out 2 CV messages independently. And he thought, wow. So he basically started work on the 2-voice TVS, 2-voice synth 1, which is this one here. And that's 2 SEM modules in a keyboard enclosure. And it was basically, I suppose, like a duophonic synthesizer you could play more than one note on. And that idea kind of expanded, went through the 4-voice synth there as well, and then culminated in the end, well, not quite in the end, but this one in 76, the 8-voice. And this is so many people's favourite synth, basically, because it's just an absolute monster. Totally impractical to work with, because you had 8 individual voices that you had to tune and basically, work with. So a very kind of impractical instrument, but the sound of it, 8 SEMs, 8 synthesizer expander modules in one thing, really big deal. There was one after this, which was a dual manual, and I was wondering whether I should put that slide in. I didn't do it in the end, but yeah, there was a later version of the 8-voice with 2 keyboards on it, and probably, I don't know, I mean, we're talking the mid-70s, probably the price of a very sizable house at that time, I'm not quite sure, but yeah, quite a lot. Anyway, we're getting towards the end of the 70s now, and in 1978, somebody else we'll talk about in a moment came to a NAMM show with a certain synthesizer called the Prophet 5, and that kind of changed pretty much everything at that time. And the Prophet 5 was, I think Tom was finding that the business for the SEMs, for the big synthesizers and that sort of thing, business was starting to slow up a little bit. And then Sequential Circuits arrived with their product, the Prophet 5. And that was a big kind of, sort of, if you like, wake-up call for Tom. So he feverishly went away and spent the next sort of year looking at how he could build a system, a polyphonic synthesizer that had presets on it, because of course that's what the Prophet 5 brought to the market there, polyphonic synth that you could store and recall presets on. So he went away and worked on the next kind of phase of Oberheim's existence, which is the OBX, the OB range of products really. So in 79, the OBX came out. Now I think this was an 8-voice synthesizer. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty certain it's an 8-voice synthesizer. With 8 SEM filters in there as well, because of course we've got a filter per voice, and it had patch recall on there as well. And again, Tom tells the story about how he was pretty nervous about this. So he took it to, I think it was a January NAMM, because they used to have 2 NAMM shows a year in the States. And they got it all set up, and he was really nervous, thinking like, this is make or break for the company now. And by the end of that show, he'd written, I think, £500,000 worth of business, or $500,000 worth of business. And that basically bankrolled the company and saved it, I think, at that point. So again, a very, very important synthesizer for the Oberheim, for the Oberheim brand. Later, OBSX came out. It's a preset version of the OBX, quite limited in terms of what you could do with that, but it had, had a lot of the presets that were available in the OBX. But that development didn't really finish. We carried on through into the OBXA in 1981. This was quite an important moment as well, because this shifted from using the Dennis Collins style SEM filter, the SEM filter that was made up of discrete components, resistors, capacitors, and op-amps. It moved to using an integrated circuit, which was being developed by Curtis Electromusic, I think. And awkwardly, they're SEM chips as well, but that's CEM, not SEM. So yeah, so that was quite a move. The Curtis chips had been adopted by Sequential, I think, around that sort of time as well, when they came up to the revision 3 of the Prophet 5. And so yeah, and the thing that they delivered was a bit more stability and a bit more kind of I suppose reliability, because we're talking about the really early days of synthesizers and electronics. You know, we look at the electronics in front of us today, you know, analog synths here. There's not much sort of difficulty in the tolerances available in the electronics here. You know, the tolerances are very, very marginal, very, very small now. But back then, they were pretty big. And so keeping things in tune, you know, and that sort of stuff was quite a challenge. So that was one of the key reasons for moving over to the Curtis chips there. And then the OB8 as well. That one expanded out the modulation capacity of the synthesizer. So they are quite basic synthesizers in their architecture, but with the OB8, they added what's called a page 2 function. I guess today we would call it a shift function on the interface, and that opened up the possibility of doing quite a bit more stuff in there. Now, have I got a slide? I don't know if I do, but anyway, what's interesting about the OB range is you see over here the Oberheim OBX8. This is an 8-voice synthesizer that has been meticulously, and I mean very, very meticulously, basically built up on the old systems. So the OBX8 there actually has all of these instruments in there, including the OBX with the SEM filters, and it's also got Curtis filters in there as well. So the OBX8 that we have over here is the OB8, the OBX, the OBXA, and some OBX8 modern sort of things in there as well. And Marcus Ryle, who was one of the guys who was working on, I think he started in '81, he's now working alongside Oberheim, and he was a key person in the development of that, and he is, let's say, very fastidious in the detail of getting these things right. So basically, yeah, I mean, that was where Marcus had come back in to kind of really work hard on bringing that Oberheim sound back. That was pretty much the first Oberheim product in the, let's say, the newest iteration, the new modern era of Oberheim. So yeah, pretty important stuff. Right, I'm just looking at the slides I've got. We better sort of speed up a bit here. So we'll skim over the DMX and the DSX. But these were interesting as well. We're in the 80s now. Drum machines are an interesting thing. People are starting to embrace digital technologies, samples. And the DMX was a ROM-based drum machine, ROM read-only memory. So you could, yeah, it had a whole load of different drum sounds in there. It had a sequencer on, it had the sequencer there, the DSX, to control that as well. Again, classic drum machine. The drum machine of Blue Monday, I believe, from New Order. So, you know, and then the DSX. And these kind of formed, alongside with the OB8 there, these kind of formed a little kind of ecosystem. They all spoke to each other. But again, this is pre-MIDI. So these were talking in their own proprietary language with each other. Then the DX, which is a slightly kind of more affordable version of the DMX in '82. And this next thing, the Prommer, which I think is amazing, because the Prommer was basically a way for you to program your own EEPROM chips with your own samples. And, you know, thinking back to 1983 here, sure, we had Fairlights, we had all the kind of the very big samplers, but really, you know, sampling was very, very much in its infancy. And the DX and the DMX were using ROM chips to hold their sounds on, and the Prommer was a little thing where you see on the right hand side there, you could put your EEPROM chip in there, and you could load it with your own samples. Now, you know, if you think about, I mean, drum machines. We've got any sample drum machines here? Well, like you can put samples in the Percons now. But things, you know, like the Electrons and Digitacs and all that sort of stuff, Novation, Circuit Rhythm, you think, or even the computer, you think nothing about putting samples into things these days. But back then, this was an absolute revelation. It's absolutely insane. And very, very forward thinking, I think. Even though quite an awkward, by today's standards, quite an awkward way of doing things. Now we get to this stage here now, and this is pretty much towards the end of Oberheim in its first kind of iteration. The expander came along in '84. The expander was basically taking this notion of a synthesizer, but putting it into, you know, making a modular synthesizer around it. So all of these synths had digitally controlled. That's how we have presets in an analog synth. You have a microprocessor that can capture, you know, basically where the voltage settings are on the analog part. it captures that, and then it can regurgitate that and give you your presets. And so, yeah, so if you look at the expander, I mean, it's not a knobby synth. You can see there's quite a lot of menu and all that sort of stuff in there. But in terms of power, it was vastly powerful. I mean, I guess, you know, if you think of the old Moog modular, it's like that, or even, you know, a modern modular, but with a preset section of presets on there as well. So very impressive. And then pretty much, I suppose, towards the back end, there were a couple of products after this, but the Matrix 12, which was basically 2 expanders in there, 12-voice analog synth with all of this huge modulation kind of possibilities, and also a velocity-sensitive keyboard too. So, you know, you could start to articulate the notes at different dynamics as well with the power of how you're controlling the keys. So again, these are really quite pioneering things. Post this sort of period, the Oberheim brand was basically bought by Gibson, and eventually Tom kind of moved away from that. He did a few things as well afterwards under the name Marion, and then eventually kind of in the sort of early 2010s, came back with the SEMs again. This was after a conversation with Roger Lynn, basically to say, he was saying, you just make those synths again. And actually, there is one of the tomoberheim.com 2-voice synths over there. And I don't know if it's plugged in, ready to go, but if you get a chance, have a play on that one. Yeah, absolutely beautiful thing. And then if we move into 2016, Tom Oberheim and Dave Smith had a bit of a chat. I think it was on a private jet, I think. And the plan was, like, I think Dave said, why don't we make, you know, a sequential style synth, but using your kind of sound? And Tom was very much up for doing that. And then the OB6 was born. We've got an OB6 over there as well, right next to Alex. And yeah, I mean, that's a great instrument as well. That's a pure analog. There's a lot of analog electronics in there. You know, it's got the SEM filter, the original SEM filter. It's the same as it was in the SEM. And that kind of brought Oberheim back into the game, really, at least in name at that point. And then I mentioned about the OBX8 a little later on. This kind of cemented Oberheim as being back in the game now. Now, I'm just looking at the time here, and I'm thinking, oh my God, right, well, let's get through here. Is it okay? Is this sort of pace sort of okay? Would you want me to just get a bit more synthy with the products here now, or should we give Dave a bit of tight space as well?
Maybe go through Dave, but maybe slightly faster than...
Okay, all right. Mr. Dave Smith there, for example. And yeah, so yeah, you can see I've gone right back to the very beginning with Dave. Dave was, I think he was an electronics student. I'm not quite sure what he was a student of, but certainly he was, he was studying back in the kind of late 60s, and somebody said there's a synthesizer in the Guitar Centre or the store nearby, and he was like, what's that? So he went to try it out, and it kind of blew his mind. And again, with all of this stuff, you know, if you play keys, you could play one, but you know, if you wanted to sort of program sequences and that sort of thing, that couldn't happen. So he started off in '74 building an analog sequencer, and he spent time on that. But his expertise was really in digital stuff, so he didn't spend too much time on that one. He moved into creating a digital sequencer in '75 there, which was his second product, the Model 800. And then this one, which I think is pretty clever, this was a patch recall system for analog synthesizers. So again, you know, we're talking Moogs that were using control voltage, and I don't think you can see it on that, but there's a ton of kind of connections on the back there where you could store the voltage values and recall them. So you could plug them into the right places and recall patches on these really nice old CV-based synthesizers. So those were the kind of the first 3 products that David created. And then he went away and then did something pretty enormous, I'd say, in '78. And that was the Prophet 5. And this was the first programmable polyphonic synth, 5-voice polyphonic synth. And this kind of really shook the market up a lot. And, you know, obviously that G'd Oberheim up to go down the OB route of products as well. But the Prophet 5 is one of the most important and influential synthesizers that pretty much has ever been made, really. At this time, you didn't have polyphonic synths that could recall patches. And then from '78 onwards, you could. And again, these are just all over the place in so many famous tracks and stuff. I'm going to go for a super nerdy graphic now of some chips. The SSM 2040, that was the filter that was used in the Prophet 5, Rev 1 and 2. It was an integrated circuit there. The SSM stuff was designed by a guy called Dave Rossum. Dave Rossum is an absolute legend of gargantuan proportions. He's still around today as well, making stuff under the name of Rossum Electro Music, I think. Yeah. He started a company called EMU back in the early 70s and developed synthesizers and stuff. He was also, a genius making, synthesizer chips as well. But in 70, what year was that? I put 78 to 80, that's not quite right. But a little bit later on, these Curtis chips arrived. They were quite a bit more stable, and so things moved over to using the Curtis chips. And once again, as I mentioned about the OBX8 there having both the SEM filter and the Curtis filter, the Prophet 10 there has also got examples of the original filter style, the SSM, which is now under the brand of SSI. They've been redeveloped. Dave Rossum has redeveloped those filters in modern kind of ways so that they're a lot more reliable and that sort of thing now. But also Curtis are also still producing chips as well, and they're all in there. So there's an interesting knob on the Prophet 10 that's there, and you can dial back time on that one. You've got the revisions on a pot, and you can dial back through the Rev 4, which that one is, all the way back to a Rev 1. And when you get to Rev 1, things start to go a bit wonky and a little bit out of tune and sound authentic. Another big one for Dave as well, the Pro 1. Mono synth from 81. Again, huge hit for Dave Smith. And it's back to being a mono synth, but it's again used all over the place. I am racing through, this is good now. Prophet 600, so I thought, oh great, I'll show the Prophet 600, the first ever synthesizer that has MIDI on it. I walked through the door and Luke said, oh, we got a Prophet 600 the other day, and there it is. So there it is, the Prophet 600, 1982, the first commercially available keyboard that actually had MIDI on it. Although Dave did other things as well, of course. But so there it is. I think there are headphones on that. That's essentially, I guess, kind of a very similar architecture to the Prophet 5. But has got MIDI on it, so yeah. And then, and another couple as well. I was thinking about the Prophet 2000, sampling synthesizer again, 1985, EEPROM based again. You can see now, membranes, the DX7 had arrived, so knobs disappeared off synthesizers and flat membrane panels came around for that amazing UI. But there it is. I mean, again, in 85, a sampler that isn't, Fairlight with a great big screen and, a huge mainframe computer underneath it. It's pretty impressive. And again, I've got a picture out of a Prophet VS, which I think is very interesting. It's a 4-oscillator wavetable synth, and lo and behold, there's a Prophet VS over there as well. What's really great about that one is there's a joystick on the end, so you can actually move through the wavetables, the various different oscillators, shapes, using a joystick. It's a lot of fun to work with. Around about 1987, the DX7 had kind of established itself as being the synth that everybody wanted, and that kind of put pay to a lot of old analog synthesizers, really. That heralded the new age of obviously FM synthesis and kind of brought in, essentially, the behemoth that was the DX7 synth. So there was a bit of a hiatus there. Dave went off to do lots of different things. I think he worked with Yamaha. I think he did some consulting with Korg as well. And in the 90s, dance music had really taken hold and people were wanting analog synthesizers again. The 303, the TB303, it kind of had its resurgence, brought people onto the dance floor again, and, well, not that it ever did, perhaps, or maybe it brought them onto the ballroom dance floor the first time round. But but anyways, acid house became a big thing. Obviously, electronic dance music became a big deal as well, and this quite excited Dave. So, early 2000s, he started up his next venture, Dave Smith Instruments. And again, the Evolver was the first sort of starting point for that. And of course, there's one over there too, right above Alex's head. But this was kind of bringing back analog synthesizers, but into the new millennium as well. The Mofo was another one that's very popular because that was actually quite reasonably priced as well. You know, we'd kind of gone through that time of analog synthesizers costing the price of a house and actually making them a bit more kind of accessible for a lot more people. So again, the Mofo there was, a very popular synthesizer. And this one over here, the DSI Tempest, the Dave Smith Instruments Tempest, that was a collaboration with Dave Smith and Roger Lynn of the Lynn drum fame. Drum machine, sequencer, sampler, analog drums, an absolute powerhouse really. It's funny to think that's, that's like 13 years old as well now. Again, that's pretty much ahead of the curve, I'd say, in terms of, you know, what these things were. So, yeah, I mean, it's you know, maybe a shorter span of time in terms of kind of what Dave had done in all of this time, but nevertheless, some really big deals. Moving into kind of the more modern era, so the name Sequential, which I think had been owned by Yamaha for quite some time at this point, was returned back to Dave. And so Sequential started off their kind of new tenure under that name with the Prophet 6. And the Prophet 6 is essentially the Prophet 5 reimagined in a modern era. And it had an extra voice as well. It had 6 voices on there. But essentially, you know, it's kind of, you know, a reimagining of what the Prophet 5 could be in a modern setting. Again, this is, you know, 2015, this is 10 years old, but still to this day, this is an absolute classic. I mean, when you watch the footage at Glastonbury, it's kind of like Prophet 6 spot for me. You know, you sit there sort of ticking off how many you spot on the stage there. This is an absolute workhorse and is kind of, you know, well, it's used by, bands all over the world. And yeah, it's, the Sequential Prophet 6. And then 2020, the Prophet 5 returns. The Prophet 10 is there. That is basically 2 Prophet 5s in a single keyboard chassis. And this is, again, like for like with the original. Dave always kind of sort of wasn't too sure if he would ever do this again because, you know, this is a synthesizer from 1978. And we've come a long, long way since that time. But enough people persuaded him, I think, eventually to kind of come round. And yeah, the Prophet 5 came back out. And, you know, it's really great, to be fair, that there is a version of the Prophet 5 available today as well. So yeah, and yeah, I kind of ran through the Dave Smith story there. I hope that's okay. But that brings me to this next slide here, which is the Take-5 and the TEO-5. And these are the products that I've got here in front of me. Now, I had 10 minutes to do a demo. Right, there. Let's see what we can do in 10 minutes. Basically, I've got the 2 units here. Now, I've got to hot foot it off very quickly, but I'm going to leave these here. So I don't know if you guys hang back for a little bit afterwards. I don't know if that's the thing or not. But, you know, feel free to come and have a noodle around on these. These are the latest synths from both the Sequential and the Oberheim camp. They're both 5-voice instruments. And if you look at them, in fact, we do that. If you look at them, there's a lot of similarities there. Okay. Oberheim and Sequential are separate brands with separate identities, but a lot of common engineering work, between them. And so, you know, they're kind of, the same people are working on both of these. But these are truly, this is a Sequential with a sequential low-pass, a 4-pole low-pass filter in it. And this is an Oberheim with the SEM filter, which is the state variable 2-pole, a 12 dB per octave filter in it. But there's a lot of the other stuff is actually kind of very similar. There are some I would say quite specific differences between them as well. So I mean, just to quickly go through the Take-5. So the Take-5 is kind of a cut down, more affordable version of the Prophet 5, if you like, with some modern trimmings as well. So both of these synthesizers have got effects processors built into them. Of course, the Prophet 5 itself doesn't. The OBX8 doesn't have effects built into them, but these do. And although they look kind of like there might be quite some similar stuff, there is actually quite a few sort of profound differences. If we look at the right-hand side, the envelopes and the effects section, you see that pretty much the layout there is identical in terms of the UI, the user interface. But if we take a look at the section on the left-hand side, which is kind of the sound generation side of things, the oscillators and the filters, they're quite different there. So it's not just a like-for-like kind of, you know, change the firmware on one and you get the sound of the other sort of thing. It doesn't work like that. There's quite a lot of stuff going on in here. Now here is the TEO-5 basic. We've not had a sawtooth, open sawtooth all night, so let's start that off now. But so here we go with the, so we've got two oscillators. A bit loud there, a bit hot. Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. Right, okay, so let's open that filter up. So let's go to the sawtooth here. We've got a shape control here that lets me basically interpolate between the oscillator outputs. So it can go from being a sine wave here, through to a saw, through to a square, through to pulse width. So that in itself is quite an interesting thing, that we can actually just move through the different wave shapes there. Now if I switch now to the TEO-5, and we'll go to that same patch. This is the TEO-5, this is a simple sawtooth. Now these are on switches, and that means that I can, you know, if I want a triangle, or if I want a square, I can sort it that way, and I have pulse width as well, so I can make the square wave not a square. I can make it more rectangular. Oh, if I grab the right pot, of course, sorry. But the interesting thing with this one is, well, on the oscillators here on the TEO-5, I can interpolate or move smoothly between the oscillator shapes. On the TEO-5, I can actually just switch all of them in there. So, you know, you can kind of use those oscillator shapes in tandem with each other to get various different things. So that's kind of one of the big differences there. They've all got, well, they've got different controls. So if I switch back to the TEO-5, back to saw, one of my favourite knobs on any synthesizer, the octave change. We've got that on here. We've got a pitch control as well, which will go a fifth up and a fifth down. Which is great, but then if I switch over to the TEO-5, I just have a single pitch control. Very broad range there, but basically it's a single pitch control. So you can see there's slightly different sort of setups there. Now, switch back to the TEO-5 because we have got a sync oscillator here as well. It's not a separate oscillator, it's an interaction between the two oscillators. So when I hit sync, basically, we have two oscillators running, and one of them will basically reset the other after its duty cycle, after its wave shape has been created, and it's passed through that wave shape, its duty cycle. So oscillators produce pitch by speeding up and slowing down. So if one is faster than the other, we can start to reset the synced oscillator, and that produces quite an interesting sound. So let's switch on the sync. A bit difficult maybe to hear that. There we go. It's a strange sound. It's a little bit filtery, but it's not quite filtery because it's not closing, it's not filtering out the sound. But it's pretty useful to have. We've also got sync. Oh yeah, and if you change around with the wave shapes, in fact, what I'll do is I'll just stick an LFO on that, low frequency oscillator, just to make it start moving around. Oh. It's been a long day. Source, LFO, pitch, go there. Let's try that. Yeah. There we go. Now, what was I going to talk about? Oh, change the wave shape. Now we've got a modulatable shape here. So if I go to my second LFO, perhaps, I can say, let's take that and connect that to the shape, and let's add an amount of that happening. So that's just an interaction between two oscillators there, but they're doing some pretty interesting and quite unusual stuff. So there you go, that's sync there. We've got that on the TEO-5 as well. So if I switch over here, and let's switch sync on, which is, come on, where are you? You are on here, aren't you? Yes, there you are, thank you. Switch. Because we've got that very big range on the pitch control there, we've got much kind of bigger range that we can use the sync with. Get pretty screamy with that. And once again, I could say, okay, let's put the LFO onto the oscillator frequency and instant Mr. Wazzo there. So yeah, so I mean, the sync is on both of these synths as well. But then we get to the filter. Now, I kind of showed the filter off before, but on the Take 5, we've got basically a low pass filter. Now, let me see if I go back to my basic patch. Oh, wrong one. Go back here. Yeah, no, that's not closing off fully properly. I think if I just bear with me a second, I think maybe if I reset the globals. There we go. Reset. Yeah. There we go. So you can hear that's quite an aggressive cut-off there. If we want to add a bit of envelope to that, as we would. So yeah, we can use this filter to get these nice kind of sounds with it. Resonance in there. So yeah, we've got a lot of stuff there. We're putting the second oscillator. So that's nice. If we stick on some of the effects, I always like to put a bit of reverb on pretty much everything. So so, you know, pretty simply and quickly, we can get some pretty big sounds there. That's using the, you know, the kind of the Prophet style low pass filter that we've got here. I'll switch over to the TEO now. Similar thing, let's say we'll put a bit of envelope on the filter. Have I changed instrument? Yeah. Let's go back to the beginning. No, maybe I didn't. Oh, I know what I've done. I reset the globals. Come on, Chris. MIDI channel 1. Thank you. That's it. Right, okay. Bit of resonance on there. Bit of envelope. Now the thing with get that resonance on the SEM, that nice kind of quacky kind of sound with it. And then I'll do my thing of sticking reverb on it. So again, very quick to get some pretty big sounds there. Now, all these two synthesizers also have a very big modulation matrix. Now, you know, when people kind of think about, you know, for example, the Oberheim, think about the Matrix 12 and all the possibilities of what you could do with the modulation, we've got pretty much a similar kind of level of modulation in both of these synths. And the modulation matrix allows me to take a source, a control, an LFO, a filter, sorry, not a filter, sorry, an envelope, or any of the controls that we've got, maybe the keyboard range here as well, and you can attach that into an aspect of the synthesizer as well. So, you know, I very quickly put envelope shaping on the filter before, but I can go into the modulation matrix here and I've got a ton of additional things that I can do. Now, one of the things that you can do on both of these synths, actually without the modulation matrix, so why did I talk about that? Well, I think it's still impressive to know about the modulation matrix there, because, you know, for example, I might put an LFO onto the reverb size or something like that. You can do a lot of nice stuff with that. But both of these synths have kind of an analog FM aspect to them as well. I'm going to switch back to the TEO-5. The TEO-5 has a little switch here in the middle. You can just probably see it there in the middle of the oscillator mixer that switches in FM control. So let's go back to the sawtooth, and what we can do is use oscillator 2 now to basically make oscillator 1 wobble up and down at audio rate speeds. And if I change the pitch, you get some pretty unwieldy sounds there. This isn't kind of the DX7 style FMing. You can dial in some interesting sounds, and then again, if you start to use some of the controls there. Bring in the sub oscillator, that's tracking oscillator 1. So that's a form of FM, that's called exponential FM. That's just basically taking a raw oscillator, which is going up and down, that's what the oscillator does, and it's attaching it to this one. As this one goes up, it brings it up, as it goes down, it brings it down. But what it can't do in this situation is go through 0. So once we get to the 0 point here, it can't go any further. And so what happens is that starts to reflect back up. I mean, this is a very, very raw and coarse explanation of FM. It's not very scientific at all, but hopefully just kind of explains what's happening. So you get this kind of thing where things get very atonal, clangorous and out of tune almost. With the you can hear that really having quite a big an effect on the sound. If I then switch to the TEO here, on this one, we've actually got a through 0 FM. So let's go back to that basic patch, sawtooth. Okay, now if I use the FM control here, actually let's go to a triangle wave. It'll be a little better for this, a bit smoother. You're getting that FM sound, but it's not going out of tune until you overdrive it. So you can push it if you want, but... And if I start to detune oscillator 2, which is the frequency, which is the carrier, the modulator, sorry. So you can do a little bit more kind of musical style FM control with the TEO-5, because that has got the ability to go through 0. So as this one's moving this one up and down, when we go down, we can pass through that 0 and reverse the oscillators, essentially, and bring them back up. And that's how you keep your tuning levels set there. So that's, again, a nice feature that the TEO-5 has. I'm not, saying that it's not good on the TEO-5. Of course, exponential can give you some really nice kind of, I mean, if you think about making percussion sounds and cymbals and that sort of thing, a lot of that is based through kind of exponential FM style control of sounds. But that's just a nice thing that's on there. Now, yeah, I think I am afraid to say I've got to hot foot over the road and do a sound check for a gig I've got to play in half an hour or so or something like that. So I think I'm probably going to have to finish up. But thanks very much for joining me. I hope it was interesting and useful. But cheers, thanks.